Computer decided to look what we said. Faster way to do this, maybe. All right, I think we're up here. Today's lesson, Max, you can't be going to sleep already. Turn around here. Pay attention. Max, feet on the floor, turn around. It's only an hour, Max, you can wait. Then you got the rest of the day to sleep. All right. It's good to see all of you this morning. Appreciate your coming. Been wanting to preach this sermon. I've had it for 3 or 4 weeks, and I decided to save it for this morning. I don't know exactly why, but I did. And we trust, hope that back Ed Rangel was trying to work up a sermon on this passage, and he kept asking everybody about their insights. So anyway, I didn't share this with him, but anyway, here we are. And there's nothing profound about this, but I think it is important for us to learn. Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9. It reads, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. Them diligently unto thy children, and shall talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be for frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates." You know, so many times I'm afraid we depend on our Bible class here to teach our children, which is just ridiculous. Your children are in Bible class for minutes maybe on Wednesday night. You wouldn't depend on that at all to teach them any subject I know. Wouldn't depend on history or science with that kind of teaching. You want them to do a diligent 12-year study, at least as a minimum, in order for them to learn the basics of these things. And yet people foolishly think that they're going to educate their children, and that somehow the church has failed them if in those little 30-minute segments the children aren't educated. It's your children to teach your children, not somebody else, not others. It's your response, not the village. It's not the village's job to teach your children. It's your job to teach your children. And you need to see to it. We ignore that. We think it's important to teach our children about sports. Invest in lots of time and energy teaching them about sports and those other subjects that I mentioned. We want them to be professionals. And so we involve ourselves. We sit up hours at night helping them How much time are you spending teaching them about the Lord and about His Word? You know, it doesn't have to be a class situation. It doesn't have to be, we're going to sit down this time and we're going to study the Bible, although that wouldn't hurt. But it can be easily in normal situations in life. And that's what this passage is talking about. It's to be a constant thing, not just an occasional idea. For instance, he says, when thou sittest in thine house. Spend some time teaching your children while you're sitting in your house. So you might need to turn off the TV occasionally. Surely there's some sitting time you do, or you've busy that you talk as a family or with your children. You know, the Bible talks about several such instances in the scriptures. For instance, in Luke 7, Jesus went to a meal with a man. You might talk about this sometime with your children. This was a meal, a party. He went to the meal. One of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. Now, you have acquaintances in life. It may not be this woman. It may be who knows who. But you have acquaintances who have done sinful things, foolish things, or very good things. This woman was good. Put an alabaster box of ointment and stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. You know, it doesn't even, the people don't have to cry. It may be remarkably sinful. It may be remarkably good. And you can relate that to the scriptures. You can relate that to this account. Just sit there and talk to them about it. That's all you have to do. When thou sittest in thine house. The Pharisee or a prophet would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she's a sinner. And Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. He saith, Master, a certain creditor dance and the other 50. Can't you tell this story to your kids? As good as what's on the news channels. The thing is, they're calling math these days. Ben, how many words? Can you not? With them? Doesn't say I want to tell you a story. It's here in Luke 7. Simon answered and said, I suppose he to whom he forgave the most. He said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. He turned to the woman and said to Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears and wiped them with the hairs of her head. You know, this may seem strange, but there are women in this congregation who don't make a big splash of things. But I know, and I suspect you know, some really good things they've done for other people. You might tell your kids about that. Have you heard about Sister fill in the blank? Did you know she took food over to somebody's house and sat with her for a while and cared? But notice another example that you could talk with about in John 12. Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. It's just a party. They made a supper. Martha served. Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table. Mary took a pound of ointment of the spikenard. You might try to explain how valuable that was. And anointed the feet of Jesus, wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled. Some point or another, your child is going to say, not that. I wouldn't do that. You might ask him. You might ask Ethan one of these days, Ethan, would you mind washing Nathan's feet there? Ethan's going to go, are you kidding me? I'm not getting anywhere near that, Bob. And then you might tell the story about the woman who washed Jesus' feet with something incredibly valuable. You might notice another one, this one in John 13. Before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew his hour was come, he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he was come from God and went to God, he rises from supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. He poureth water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet. You know, you might tell your children, whether it's happened to you yet or not, about brother and sister so-and-so who moved mom and dad in with them and cared for them when they were bedfast and they'd lost their minds. Onerous sort of job. But they never viewed it as bad or evil or hard, because it was something that needed to be done. And the disciples said, no, you're not going to wash my feet. Jesus says, if I don't wash you, you won't be clean. And you can talk about the illustration from it. But these are lessons, simple lessons, that it doesn't take a big class. And there'll be practical applications from people they know. You know, have you seen brother so-and-so? Do you know what he did for his mom and dad? What he does all the time or every day? You should be able to talk when you walk by the way. We all get away from that. I get away from that. My wife does. We've got a TV in the car. DVD player. And I can tell you right now, where is Lydia? Is she here this morning? There she is. Lydia can sing every song and knows all the dialogue to the movie, The Music Man. She has seen that thing in the car about 50 times so that we all sing along with it wherever we're going. But is that really good? Our kids are so obsessed with playing games and watching TV that can you break in on them and just tell them some things when you drive down the road? Is it important to do that? In Luke 24, behold, two of them went that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 80 furlongs, and they talked together of all those things that had happened. And it came to pass while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. You know, my children, as they grew up, we went through some hard times. A lot of religious discussion, a lot of religious debate, some difficulties in this congregation and others. We never once hid any of that from our kids. Not a thing. We talked with them about it. It was important they learned this part of life. And I think, just a thought, I think the notion of that struggle to be a Christian, to be righteous, to be faithful, to be loving, made them stronger. It'll help your kids too. Don't hide the hard parts from them. These men they'd seen Jesus crucified, and they needed to talk about that. Can you imagine the hatred and the blasphemy they had heard, and the hopes that they had that seemed dashed? And so Jesus joins them and says, what manner of communications are these, in verse 17, that ye have one to another as ye walk and are sad? And one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answering said, art thou only a stranger in Jerusalem, and hast not known the things which are come to pass there in these days? He said unto them, what things? They said unto him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and have crucified him. But we trusted it had been he. And then he goes on to talk about, some of the women came telling us about some goofy idea of a resurrection. They couldn't find his body. They'd seen a vision of angels. Verse 24, certain of them which were with us went to the sepulchre and found it even so as the women had said. But him they saw not. Jesus said, O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things? Now, when you have difficulty in life, maybe in your family, maybe at work, maybe in the church, do you hide that from your kids? They know about the problems in your family, believe it or not. Probably as well or better than you do. They need to know that you're having some stress at work, and that everything might not always be rose-colored down at church. But we're going to be Christians. The Lord told us that we would suffer. We're going to get through it. It's important for your children to learn that. It'll make them stronger. Hiding the difficulty from them will make them weaker. And so that when they grow up and they realize that all job opportunities are not rosy, every family situation is not blissful and smiling, and the church isn't always good, they're going to have troubles. They're going to lose their faith. You need to strengthen them and let them see that this is part of life, and the Lord expects us to get through it. But as well, you might think a little bit further. When you lie down, oh, I'm showing my age, but you know, there were so many nice programs on TV when I was a youngster, when my kids were young. There was that Little House on the Prairie show. There was, what was the one with John Boy? I can't think of the name of it anymore. The Waltons, yeah, where they would talk. Don't you do that when you lie down? Do you talk to the kids from room to room? Something besides shut up and go to sleep? Maybe you could talk about a few things. You know, in 1 Samuel 3, the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. And it came to pass at the time when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see. Ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep, that the Lord God called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. You know, some of you have little kids. Why not talk to them about this? Say to your kids, you know, instead of thinking about Batman and Superman and I don't know, all of those guys, ask him, son, do you ever think about God? Do you ever think about what he might be trying to say to you? The Lord, he went and lay down, The Lord called Samuel. He answered, "Here am I." He ran unto Eli and said, "Here am I, for thou callest me." And he said, "I called not. Lie down again." And he went and lay down. And the Lord called yet again Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here am I, for thou didst call me." He was just a little boy. He answered, "I call not, my son, lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time, and he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here am I, for thou didst call me." And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, "Go lie down, and it shall be, if he shall call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth." So Samuel went and lay down. Well, you know the message that God gave Samuel, that he had to go in and tell Eli, was a sad message. Do you talk to your children about the fact that they might think as they begin to sleep about something besides the TV and movies, and talk with them about these things? And when you get up in the morning, what do you talk about at breakfast? Do you go over those spelling words again? Well, it shouldn't take too long now. You've spent an hour or so on them. Maybe you could talk about something else. Let me tell you about a man. This is the man in Job. There was a man in the land of Uz. Oh, that's a funny name, isn't it? Whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, one that feared God and hated evil, and there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. And his sons went and feasted in their houses every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. That was a good family. They enjoyed one another. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus did Job continue when they rise up. Job cared about his children and wanted to be sure they were sanctified. Is it more important to you that your children succeed in school or in business than it is that they succeed in serving God? Which have you put first in your life? Now, he says these things that you're going to teach your children. Now, the Jews perverted this whole thing. They actually made something called phylacteries, which was a box that they would put on their arm. And they'd hold it on by a strap, but they didn't tie it. It wasn't tied. It was just a loose strap that had to be held in your hand. So you constantly had a clenched hand, so that you were constantly reminded of that box. And in that box, they had put this passage in Deuteronomy. And they would sometimes put the same sort of box, a little wooden box, on their head, and they'd tie it on with a strap, and it'd have the same passage in Deuteronomy. And I have done some things like that. I've got pictures of my dad at 2 or 3 places where I work, so he's always looking over my shoulder. And I was out at a place one time, and I saw a crown of thorns that, like they put on Jesus. And I hung that on my wall to remind me occasionally that life is not that bad for me. I haven't gotten to that point. And to remind me of what Jesus did. That's just me. But that really isn't what this is about. And that isn't what God was saying to them. He was saying you as parents need to put this into their hearts and into their minds so that they're part of them, so that this information is the guide to their lives. So then he says, it'll be frontlets. It'll be a sign to them all their lives. You might notice a couple of passages in Matthew 6. Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. You know, you kids, I've noticed you guys. You don't, none of you are Christians yet. And so the plate's passed. We're going to take the bread in a minute. You don't partake. We're going to take the fruit of the vine in a few minutes, and you don't take that. But we do, I noticed, I try to make sure, and your parents try to make sure you have some money. And so we pass the collection plate, and most of you contribute, right? Probably got some money today. Well, you know, when I was a little boy, and it was a long time ago, and I had money, I wanted everybody to see that I had money. Once in a blue moon, I got $1. And I didn't fold the $1. I wanted it all to flap out so that everybody saw, I've got the $1 bill, and I'm putting it in the plate. Did you know the Lord doesn't appreciate that? That's a strange thought. You're so proud of it, but he doesn't expect you to be proud. That's what he says here. Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Once in a while, you'll help somebody. And you run back into everyone and, I helped George. Good for you. But the Lord doesn't expect you to brag about it. He expects you to just do it. Whether there's anybody praising you or not, he sees, he knows. Take heed that you do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise, you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have. Some of these Jews, they would have some guy, they'd be carrying a big chest of money to the temple, and they'd have some guy marching in front of them. Doo-doo-doo, I'm bringing money. The Lord says, you got all the reward you're going to get. That's what he says. He says, verily I say unto you, they have their reward. That was it. The praise of men. God didn't appreciate it. When thou doest alms, do not let thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. It should be a sign to you. It should just be part of your life. You might notice another passage along this line in Matthew 23. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do, but do not after their works. For they say and do not. They bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. All their works they do for to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries, we talked about that, and enlarge the borders of their garments. They wrote stuff on them. Now, you may wonder, why doesn't John come up here in a robe and a big crown, looking all clerical? Because the Lord expects it to be in our hearts. Why don't you wear a big sign? I'm a Christian. Because the Lord expects you to be in your heart. To be a part of you. Not something you wear. He says they make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments and love the uppermost rooms at feasts and the chief seats in the synagogue. Now then, this morning, if you could humbly submit to the Lord who saved you, not seeking any glory, teaching all you can around you, your children and others, you'll be a servant. But if you haven't begun, nothing will matter. And so this morning, at the conclusion of this lesson, we invite you to begin. We invite you to come, believing, repent of your sins, confessing, be baptized, and then go home and tell your family what you've done and why you did it, and beg them to do the same. It may take a while because it's going to be a big change in your life. But you can do this, and you can teach your children, your parents, your brothers and sisters, and your neighbors. But first, you make the decision. Come while we stand and sing.